Hi, and welcome to Banned Books Conversations, where radical readers discuss prohibited prose. I'm your host, Tonya Todd. Banned books are literary works that have been removed from a library shelf or school curriculum. Over the course of Banned Books Week, this series will cover 7 different books, the reasons they were banned, and the value in reading them. Today's book is a classic written by George Orwell, no stranger to controversial material. His books are among the most challenged in history. What we're doing isn't so much of a discourse on Orwell, or even a book review, although I'm sure elements of that will slip in. The goal here is for us to have a panel conversation about his novel 1984 as a banned book. But before we get into that, let's meet today's radical readers. Please tell us a bit about yourself and what you do. And we'll start with Tony, who has been waiting for this conversation his whole life.
I have. To you, friends, as I toast my
Nice.
victory gin. Hello. Thanks for meeting me in the place where there is no darkness. I'm Tony.
Yes.
I am a college writing professor. I teach humanities as well. And I have been writing and thinking about comic books pretty much since I was 12. And but books have always been my thing. I read 4 to 5 books a week. And I'm very excited to be here.
Do you want to show us your shirt?
Oh, sure. I will turn the camera down. So this was very important. I bought this, you'll be shocked to learn, in late 2016. I wonder why.
Any particular reason?
I don't know. It could be
That
something.
phrasing seems familiar.
I wonder what that is. My favorite thing is, though, when I wear it into different parts of town, depending on who the person is, I get different looks. Some people just see it out of the corner of their eye and are like, they think they know what it is. And then when they read it, they're shocked because they're like,
blue.
Oh, he's that guy. Yeah, right. Exactly. When I wear it into the library, I get, high fives and fist bumps because they all get it right away. Some people don't get it at all.
And that's sad.
That is sad. So yeah, it where I live, my building is full of red hats and things. So
I see.
And
I'm guessing they're not the Rage Against the Machine red hats that say Make America
and they're
Rage
not the
Again.
ones that, no, they're not the ones that say cake on them either, because Cake actually made the ones that said Make America Cake Again. It's not them. No. Mm-mm.
So Jack, tell us about yourself. What do you do? Why are you here?
Well, I'm kind of Tony's shadow, I guess is what I was thinking as he said that. I just kind of follow him around wherever he goes. No, I'm excited to talk about this too. I think hopefully I'll bring maybe a more of a layman's perspective to the conversation than the expert one. But
you're also a teacher, so I can't see how you're a layman. I'm the layman here.
No, but I mean, I think I know we're going to talk about how many times we've read the book and our involvement with it and stuff, but I certainly, it's not one that I've read a lot, like time and time again. It's one where, as I was reading it for this, that beats were familiar and I knew, but it's not something which I could just quote off the top of my head, other than obviously the famous sayings that absolutely everybody knows. It is one which is in my sphere of consciousness consistently because of teaching. It's actually a part of the dystopian fiction syllabus which we teach, the unit of work which we teach to some of the students in my English class, which is really interesting because, of course, they haven't got a clue what it's about. But yeah, I guess that's what my perspective, where I mainly come from, is as a teacher and where this fits in with introducing it to new people.
So what prompted you to take part in these conversations? I'm asking you, Jack.
Oh, apologies. For me, really, obviously, like, we worked together quite a bit, the three of us, and I know when you brought up this conversation, this was happening, it sounded like a really exciting project. And sometimes with our group, it becomes a bit overwhelming with what things you can do and join in on and be excited about. But as somebody who is passionate about independent thinking and somebody who's passionate about creation and culture and what that can do, and somebody that's passionate about, as I said, with young people, them receiving, how do I word this? Not receiving the right message, because that's almost as bad as saying they should only be getting one message, because of course they should all read what they want into the book. But for them to be able to experience something like this is really important. and for them to be able to heed the warnings and take what message they think is important from it, I think it can't be undervalued at all.
Mm. How about you, Tony?
Yes, all of that. I say that, well, you know, we are English teachers, and you know, I think the last, and especially it's gotten worse lately too. It's part of the problem. I mean, my whole life, books have been banned. Where I grew up in Southwest Michigan, um, I'm really close to Notre Dame University, right? So very Catholic-y, Christy McGotty pants stuff. And I remember there being, I think it was my sophomore, junior year, there was a story about a town that's in Michigan, but like adjacent to South Bend, Indiana, home of Mayor Pete, now Secretary Pete. But a priest came over and like walked into the high school there and took books out and started burning them in the parking lot, like
Oh my goodness, you've
in the late. I
you've seen
didn't see it.
book burnings?
Didn't happen in front of me, but it happened in my county. And so it was like what the fuck? This is like 1990, maybe this happened. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. So you know, I've seen it happen. My wife is a librarian, you know, like this is important to us. The fact that ideas matter, and that and I know as our conversation goes, we'll get into, you know, being offended by ideas and why we should or shouldn't be. But so for me, is just as soon as you said Banned Books Week, I'm like, okay, let's do this. And I think, you know, this needs to just be, I've already kind of nudged you into doing it next year too. It's important. And the discourse needs to happen. And you know, you never know who's going to stumble across this. Like it could be somebody who just is normally like a Comics in Motion listener or a Pop Guerrilla listener or whatever, who's like picks this up and is like, oh, I didn't even know this was something they were going to do. So I think we're in the right venue too, to just maybe push it out to folks who weren't expecting this kind of conversation. So it's just exciting.
I think there's a big it's already a big conversation. There's a bigger conversation as well, because like banned books is obviously, we're all going to sit here and obviously not agree with that concept. But even the limiting of access to books, I think, is covered by this topic. And as an English teacher, obviously in the UK, who's been through a couple of different changes and expectations of what our curriculum should be, we have gone through a change in the time I've been a teacher where we were promoting British values, as it was called, which essentially meant we're taking everything off the curriculum that's not by a British author, which was crazy. So it meant we lost To Kill a Mockingbird, which I used to love teaching, which I actually used as one of my observation lessons when I was training to be a teacher. And it was something that I was incredibly proud of, the concept, because, you know, when you're training to be a teacher here, I don't know what the system's like for you guys there. You have to, the way I did it, I had to go through a year and you have these key observations. And you always step up your game a little bit, I guess, like you do with anything. Like when you know you're being watched, you try a little bit harder. And we happened to be teaching that book at the time. And I was incredibly like proud of the lesson I planned and what I did with the kids. I'd got them all to experience what it was like receiving the kind of treatment that people do in that book. So I'd, you know, make all the girls stand on one leg to begin with, and then all the boys who had green eyes had to turn their backs on me, and then I'd done all these crazy things. Anyway, there's me just self-promoting myself now. But it was one of those, like, it was one of those moments when I was like, because I was trained for teachers, I was like, yes, I should be, like, this is it. Now I know this is the right, I'm making the right decision. This is the right way for me to go. But so yeah, we lost To Kill a Mockingbird, we lost The Mice and Men, and just because they're not by British author doesn't mean we shouldn't teach them. There's so many important messages in those two books that like to repeat myself before, that kids need to hear and kids need to experience, and they need to then decide what that right message is moving forward. And they can be, to tie into what you said already, Tony, and I know we're going to talk about, there can be difficult moments. What we did manage to do, because we felt passionate about Mice and Men, was manipulate it down into outside of GCSE, so outside of our exam years. So there's a bit more freedom, a bit more wiggle room there. So we do still teach it to what we call year 9, which would be 13 and 14-year-olds. So we teach it to them. So we managed to like get it in there, and you do get some touchy moments. There's some language in there, and there's some treatment of characters that is difficult to read. But then you just have to have those conversations with these students. The students where I teach is it's a non-selective school, so we have a broad range. We have an estate on the edge of where we teach, so we get the full gamut of races, backgrounds. We have a high percentage of international students that come in. So over the last year, we've had a lot of Ukrainian students coming in because of what's been going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
and it's the sort of school where they get put into. Like, this school will cater for your needs. So it's important for all these students to experience this kind of text. So yeah, I think it's a really big conversation which we won't put a full stop on, and we won't answer. But I can already feel like I can feel like my levels are moving up already just at the start of this. It's really important, and I think what you're doing is amazing.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate you both being a part of it. You were among the first to say, I'll help, as soon as I was kind of throwing it out there that, you know, part of being an activist is being active in your activism, and I feel like I need to do something. And right off the bat, you're both, you know, whatever you need us to do, but, and Tony was like, but if it's this book, this is the one I want. Definitely. Like there were so many
I
people
would have
like,
done
I'll
any
do
of
this
them.
one or this one. You know, when I gave out the list, they're like, I can
Yeah.
do this or this or this. And Tony's like, 1984.
Oh my God. It's just, to me, it's the most important book written in English. That's how I feel. I feel it's the most important book. It may not be the best book written in English, but it's so good. But I think it's the most important book ever written in English.
Extremely important.
Yeah. And so it's just one of those things I revisit it all the time. I think about it all the time. Rereading it for this sits inside me. And I taught it for a whole year. I've taught it several times. My online course, 2018, 2019, we were reading Station 11, and then the pandemic happened. So I was like, okay, we're not going to read we're going to pull out of that one. And I dropped 1984 in there thinking, well, maybe people haven't read it again in this world where we're living. So in the middle of the pandemic and the disinformation and everything that was happening, I spent a year teaching this book to online adults, and it was pretty awesome. They had to write a paper about media manipulation and media literacy and stuff. So it was
that's great.
It was good. It's because you can do so much with this book. It can go anywhere. So I'm excited.
So before we really dig into this particular book, tell me, have you ever been offended by something that you read in a book? And I'm asking you first, Tony.
Sure. I mean, I would be a lie to say no. That's not, of course, I'm offended by stuff all the time. I've been offended by stuff I watch. I get offended by stuff that I read. I get offended by stuff that happens outside my door. And so what my choice is, I'm a firm believer in you put ratings on things and then you ban nothing. So now, books don't have ratings. Comic books do, of course, right? As we know, and video games do, and music does. And I was never against that. I'm okay that you put a rated M on, 2 Live Crew. That was the big thing in my childhood. 2 Live Crew is the one who pushed it. And it was like, they're banning music. But remember, Tipper Gore never banned music. She said, this is terrible music. I'm not telling you you can't make it or buy it. I'm just saying I don't want an 8-year-old to pick up Face Down, Ass Up. That's the way we like to talk. Maybe an 8-year-old shouldn't pick that up.
I like that you had to finish the line.
Sorry. It was,
okay.
We're not banning ourselves here.
Or so you've heard, right? Or so I've heard.
Yeah. No, I was there. That was in my teenage years. I was there for that. And that song's objectively awful, but so you just choose to not listen to it, right? If a book offends you because of what happens in the book, you stop reading it. If a movie offends you because of what's happening on screen, you stop watching it. And that's it. You don't say to somebody else, if they ask your opinion, did you like blah, blah, blah? You're like, no, I thought it was awful for these reasons, not just because, but you give the reasons. And sometimes, and sometimes you're offended because it's just poorly done. Right? You are not always just offended by the book itself or the content of the book. Sometimes you're offended, like, this fucking thing got published. Come on.
Yeah, as us three sitting here. I can see that.
Yeah. As people who are trying to get books published, you get really salty. Yeah, totally spot on, sir. But yeah, so of course, but I think it's okay. And your solution is to shut it off or look away or put it down and then move on instead of telling someone else not to do it.
So you brought up rating systems, and some people feel that is a form of censorship, putting ratings on things.
I don't think so, because I do think it's up to the parent or guardian to know what their kids are up to, but I also believe that you should give your kids library cards and let them go into the library. And so if you can't be everywhere with your kid all the time, you can't always know. So having a rating system means an 8-year-old's not getting into Midnight Cowboy. I'm okay with that. You know what I mean? Like, that's fine. I think Midnight Cowboy should exist, but I don't know that an 8-year-old needs to see it. So I'm not so
Or certainly not your 8-year-old, right?
right. Not my, I mean, and because there was very little regulation on what I watched as a child. So, and I know that I let my kids watch stuff. I've openly said my kids watched Buffy when they were little, and people probably thought that was horrific. But you pick and choose. Those are your choices. I was an informed person about Buffy, so I let them watch it. But yeah, if I don't have the time to watch it first, the rating just helps me. And so I don't agree with all the ratings. I don't think every rating is accurate, but I think it's just a guide.
Especially when you consider Jaws as like PG.
Right. Airplane is PG.
That's a little scary.
Yeah.
You know?
Jaws is totally scary. Full frontal nudity in Airplane. All those blowjob jokes and everything. And the child molestation jokes. Haha. Somehow that's funny. But that's an Airplane and that's rated PG. So yeah.
It's all subjective.
Yeah.
How about you, Jack? Have you ever been offended by a book?
I was thinking about it as you were talking and before we started. I've got a pretty high tolerance, if I'm honest, for most seemingly offensive subject matters or topics or off-color jokes. Or I think Ricky Gervais is obviously has done well for himself, and he's a comedian he doesn't really censor what he does. And he's like, well, if you get offended, that's kind of on you. Like, everything I'm saying is a joke. And to a wide extent, I do agree with that. I think, Tony, you just mentioned then, child molestation jokes. Of course, somebody's going to be offended by that, and of course, it needs to be delivered correctly if there is a way to deliver a child molestation joke correctly. But I don't think any topic should necessarily be taboo, as long as you're delivering it in order to reveal something about that subject, I guess is where I'd come to it. Airplane is a zany, stupid movie. I do personally feel it still stands up as a hilarious movie. Not every joke is going to land, and not every joke is going to be successful. But it's not a movie that is malicious. It's not making those jokes because it thinks child molestation is funny. It wants, and also it's not necessarily trying to make a comment on it either. But it's just like, this is in the world, and here's it kind of as a way for it to be put out there. I'm not sure.
And I don't think that anyone takes Airplane seriously as like, this content is intended for serious purposes. It's very satirical, and it is intended for humor. And if it's not your brand of humor, then don't watch it.
Absolutely. And to that statement, everyone is allowed to be offended if they want, and of course that's fine. But I think Tony hit the nail on the head. You just stop watching. You just stop reading. You just don't tune into that TV show next week. If Game of Thrones offended you because it had too much nudity and objectification and incest or whatever, quite, stop watching. It's fine, or stop reading. So I'm sure I can't think of an instance. I can definitely give an instance where something's been bad enough it's offended me. That's there's more than enough.
We've all been there. Yeah,
more than enough of those. Particularly as you said, Tony. Three writers that are aspiring to get published works out there. I've been offended by some books that I've read. That's definitely for certain. But I can't think of anything that's really shook me to the core where I've thought like that's it. Like I can't deal with that anymore. No, I don't think so.
So this isn't my first recording for this series, and I will tell you that one of the discussions made me question my feelings on this because of a book that was mentioned, and it was, wow, that if I were going to burn a book, that might be it. Like it was it was so bad, and I could not, without seeing it myself, I would have to read it myself and go through it, but I cannot fathom the value in this book. And it was aimed at children. Like that was the problem, is that it was a children's book and it was teaching stuff that is just so awful. Like, just why would you do that to children? Why would you teach them that this is the way? Why would you set them up in life like this? And I can't even understand how that wouldn't be the intention behind this. Like, are you really so out of touch that you think that this is safe? And that was the problem. It felt like a dangerous book for children to read, not because of the ideas that they might conceive. It's because of things they might think are okay that are really not okay.
Yeah. I mean,
But
maybe
again,
I've
I'd
just
have
not
to
read-
read it myself, and I was shocked that, I just assumed everyone I brought on this series was going to have the exact same mentality, and wonderfully enough, we don't. And that's even better because it makes for more informed conversations, because we're bringing in perspectives that are different from ours. And I think that's one of the most important reasons to read books.
I think what you said there is so important. Like, it's about being, sorry, Tony, it's about being informed. Like, you heard their viewpoint, and that has perhaps changed what you think about this concept slightly, but you would never commit to it without having read it. And I think that's really important. I also think what you're saying is really interesting. Obviously, I know you don't want to repeat what's been said in the previous show, so we'll have to talk off air about what that was. But I
Or you'll
guess
have
that's
to
not.
watch the
Well,
episode.
tune in and listen.
Well, of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
I will definitely be doing that anyway. But I can't wait that long, Tonya. Was my point. No, I just really can we hit pause and we'll do that. And
You
we'll
want
come
the
back.
inside scoop, right?
Yeah,
I do. But I guess I wouldn't gravitate towards something that's going to be brainwashy or QAnon-y or overtly one particular religion, or something that might fit into this category, I suppose, is not the sort of thing I'd be inclined to pick up in the first place.
That kind of leads into my next question is it there ever a valid reason to ban a book? And we'll start with you, Tony.
I don't think so. I think, again, if you're not going to do warnings, if you're not going to put trigger warnings, you're not. I'm pro trigger warning too. I think there's actually a couple of websites that do a good job of this that give you non-spoilery trigger warnings, but they'll just be like, hey, this happens in this book. We're not giving it away. And I know you hate spoilers, Tonya, but I think but I do think a non-spoilery trigger warning is okay. Because I think if you have a trigger warning, whatever it is, that's valid. That's a real
Who does it
thing.
hurt to put a trigger warning?
It doesn't. And it's like, and you don't have to give the description of it. So you're like, hey, trigger warning, this happens, whatever.
I mean, even if they want to put a trigger warning page, you know what? If I don't want the spoilers, I won't read that page.
Correct. And it doesn't have to be detailed. Like when we did the book club, the Sandman Volume 2, Matt B. Lloyd didn't come on because in that Sandman Volume 2, there's a boy who's locked in a basement and he goes within himself to find solace. And it's really horrible child abuse. I mean, he's not being sexually abused, he's not being beaten. I mean, he does get punched one time, but he's not like, there's not that. It's mental abandonment. He's a mess, mental abuse, and you're locking a boy in a basement. And Matt just said, I just am not in the right headspace. I can't go on.
That's
to talk
totally
about it.
fair. But I do want to point out, I didn't read the second one yet. That's why I wasn't on that conversation.
Well, sorry, it's in the show too. Regardless, it does. I didn't tell you who it is, but the point is, those things are there. Those things happen. So again, just saying like, hey, this is something bad. There's going to be child abandonment in this story. Like NPR, which is where I got this hat, Facts Matter. They do that before a story. They'll even say like, hey, we're going to talk about child endangerment for the next 4 minutes.
Yeah.
So if you want to turn off your radio, turn it off for and they'll even go like 4 minutes and 28 seconds. They'll tell you exactly how long the story is. That's awesome because then you're like,
we want you to come back, but we also don't want to hurt you in any way.
We don't want you to be shocked. And if you've got your kids in the car and we're going to go into a graphic description of child endangerment or the spoils of war, maybe you're not ready for your 8-year-old in the back seat to hear what's really happening outside of that nuclear plant in Ukraine. So you shut it off and then you come back. So I appreciate that. So I don't think you ban. I just think there's nothing wrong with a warning. I believe you ban nothing, but
give people information is what you're saying.
100%.
Yeah.
How about you, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. Like, information is key, isn't it? Here, I don't know how your rating systems works over in the US, but here we have a governing body called the BBFC, which is the British Board of Film Classification. As it sounds, they started off by classifying films, but they broadened out to computer games and TV, and I think they've gone into the realms of the internet and stuff now, because of course you've got to move with the times. But what they obviously do provide justification for what is going to go in the cinema, but the key thing they do is provide, as you said, Tony, almost like a click and flick guide of what is to be expected in this film or whatever it might be. And I think that is important. We keep coming back to the same idea. It's about parental guidance and what that you believe is right for your child's experience at this time. As an adult, hell, it's up to you. I mean, I'm never going to watch a Serbian film. I know this is a book. Sorry, I won't talk about films for too much, but I'm never going to watch a film called a Serbian film because what's the point? It's like was made to be the most extreme kind of torture porn type movie possible. Like, I'm going to get nothing from this. But if that's somebody else, that's up to them. So yeah, I don't think we need to ban, but I think guidance and knowing what's going to come up is really, really important. I've been the same in my life. My eldest is 10. He's watched 12s. He's watched most of the MCU because he was really interested for a while. We've watched all the Jurassic Parks. You know, that first Jurassic Park particularly is quite scary at times.
Yeah.
But I felt he was ready. There's going to be a debate with my younger, who's 3, because his mum is a bit more sensitive to this matter. So he might have to wait a little bit longer to get some of his experiences with TV and books and games and
And some kids are more
comics and
sensitive than others. Just because one of your
that's
children
true.
is ready doesn't mean the other is ready by that age.
That's true. But I think you've highlighted it again. The key thing is like the people who know them best need to make that decision rather than somebody else. So I don't need anybody to tell me that my child can't read that book. I'm going to burn it or what, you know. I need to know, is that book appropriate for my child that I've known his whole life? Because in my you know, I have 2 sons, so is it him? Are they ready for it? And that's my decision to make. And in fact, you know what? It's their decision to make ultimately,
Yeah.
because there's plenty of things my eldest has chosen not to read when we've tried it out or watch, or because he hadn't felt ready for it or wasn't enjoying it, and that's important too, that he gets to have a say in that.
Yeah, pick up on those cues, have the conversation, don't force the material upon them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I want to ask, in general, what can be learned from reading a book with content that some people do find offensive or worthy of banning?
I think you need to always consider what is out there, the other side of your viewpoint and your argument. How can you be, you know, to use that word again, informed if you don't know enough? You don't need to know everything, but know enough about each subject. If you're not challenging yourself and your viewpoint on your knowledge and your intellect constantly, if you're not growing, well, we're looking at 1984, you know, society is going to hit a certain point and there's not going to be that opportunity for revolution, for growth, for change, so I think that would probably, in a nutshell, where I would come at it from.
And Tony?
Yeah, no, I think what we know is true. What the research proves out, facts. Reading it creates empathy, right? So there's a couple of things that you can do there. So if you're what you can learn from a book that has content that some people find offensive is you can do is you can learn why those people find that offensive and learn about them. So it's 2 things. When you read about something, there's this young children's writer, a middle reader writer. He's called Jonathan Rand, and I brought him in to do a presentation down here. And he said, books aren't a thing you do, they're places you go. They take you on adventures, and books don't have covers, they have doors, right? Those are his things. And he gets the kids all fired up, and it's amazing. He tells this story about how this morning I went for a ride through the Sahara because he read this book about it. And so you don't know anything about that. So that's the empathy that books bring, right? Is you get to meet people who aren't you. That's why it's a shame, Jack, that if you're only reading books written by English people, well, that's not okay, because you're going to meet hopefully other people who aren't English, and it's like, and you don't just have to read American books or Canadian books. I mean, Atwood's Canadian. I mean, shouldn't we be reading Atwood? I've read The Handmaid's Tale once. I'm never going to read it again because it's hard. Not like it's hard to read. She's a good writer, but like I've never read an Atwood book twice.
It's emotionally challenging for you.
It is so hard, but I'm glad I read it once. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm glad that she exists. I'm glad she's out there. And every time Atwood puts something else out, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. And sometimes I just take a pass because I'm not in the right place emotionally to read an Atwood book, because I know what she's going to do. I've been there. I've been along her ride for most of her ride. It's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna. But so that they're not getting those things because they're not going to read those books. And that's tragic, because like Jojo Rabbit, was written by an Australian person. Well, so it's like, or a New Zealander. So you're like, oh, I'm not gonna. And that book is way different than the movie, but very good. And so it's like, oh, we can't read that either. So that's just disappointing to do. And so not only does it give you empathy for the characters, but then it also can give you empathy for that person who finds the offense. cultural relativism is a huge, big, important thing, right? And so like we have a conversation so we can understand the cultures of people, and what's okay here is not okay here, and what's allowed here is not allowed here. And even in our own countries, we're big enough where there's a culture north v south, east v west. What is culturally acceptable in some parts of even my own state is different than in other, the bigger city. We don't do that here. And in
I don't
other
know that
cities.
it's just because we're big, though, because the UK may not be huge, but they also have those cultural differences.
No,
between
right.
them.
Yeah, they definitely, the north to the south, it's like a totally different, and you guys have 4 countries in your country.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many times I have to hear somebody give people shit about being Welsh. It's like, what? Why do we care? But again, that's important to know, right? One of my favorite writers.
That it
Welsh.
happens.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And so to me, though, I want to understand, well, what is it? Why is it that you're challenged by this? And then I can know you. So I'm reading the book that you're offended by. And then I can then have the conversation with you. Well, what did you dislike about it? What made you uncomfortable? So now I'm learning about the characters. I'm getting that empathy, but I'm getting the empathy with the person who didn't like the book too. So I think it's important. And again, there's some that I just don't want to. Like you said, Jack, that movie, that sounds awful. I think torture porn is awful. I think that's not horror. I think Eli Roth, I'm not interested. Sorry, man. I tried one of your movies and was like, gross. I'm not interested in you. No, thank you, sir. I'll move on. People love him.
But
That's
you said
great.
you're not interested. You didn't say burn it, remove the choice away from other
Correct.
people.
Yeah. I think torture porn is bad horror. I think horror movies are subversive and smart and satirical in all the best ways. And I don't know why they get anything out of Eli Roth's movie other than like, how much can I make you squirm in your seat? And other people are like, oh my God, he's awesome. And whatever, the 7th Hostel movie, which is the same as, whatever. Not
Did it
my
go
bag.
that long?
I don't know how far they went. I'm not interested. I wasn't interested past the first one, so I have no idea. I assume he's still making them. They all probably made money, but that's cool for whoever wants that. So, and I like bad things that are bad on purpose. Like I like things that are silly and absurd. And so, yeah. Sorry,
what
I rambled.
You're saying is don't be sorry. That's why you're here. There's an audience for it. It's just not you. And you're okay with that.
Yeah.
I think that's so insightful, that comment about like learning more about the people who find that offensive. I don't think I've ever thought of it in that way before. Obviously,
that's why we bring on Mr. Empathy on this show.
Yeah, right. I mean, your comment about the movement we had in our curriculum, it will surprise you not at all to learn that it came around at a time in a change of government, which your T-shirt is reflecting in a change in your government at that time too. So it won't
Same
surprise
time,
you at all. Yeah,
Mini
it won't
Trump
surprise
over
you
there.
that. Pretty similar times this was going on. But I think we know how much we're gaining about our understanding of other things as we're reading it. So, as you said, culturally, especially, but in any way, kind of sexuality, gender, all these fluid things, which are changing all the time. And as somebody who's now approaching that middle part of life, it's quite hard to keep up with, to be honest. And I feel like I try, particularly as I work with young people. I feel like I try, and if I have open people, which I have had in the last couple of years, I had a student who was going through a gender change transition, and they were open about it, and it was amazing to talk to them and learn what it was like, and to see their confidence doing it in front of other students. And you feel like this is that growth.
It's really special, isn't it?
Yeah, and
That's
you
awesome.
want to
Trusted
learn
with
about
it.
that, understand, and yeah, exactly, absolutely trusted. And books give you that too, because you're hearing it from that perspective and characters that you don't experience in your life. I knew all of that, but to hear that extra thought of also those people, because you're right, we're empathetic people, even if we don't agree with what that person is saying or their viewpoint, they still matter as a person. Generally, by and large, there's a few people probably that we could argue don't matter, I'm sure. But
we could
I don't
get
know.
a
I'm the one
list.
who wants the gauntlet.
yeah,
I would just be a lot less random about it.
yeah, sure. There's a few. Maybe we're not going to ban books, but maybe there's a few people we could just click out of existence. Fair. But generally, I think that's a comment that it's going to change me. I think moving forward after today to think about.
Look at you, Tony.
Yay.
This is why we love you.
I mean, you just want to know. I mean, I just want to know why. Like, that's the problem, is when people say, I don't want to read this, or I ban this book offends me. why, just give me a reason why it offends you. And honestly, totally, I think it's bullshit. But if somebody says, this book offends me because of my faith, and my faith is real to me, and my faith says gay people are an abomination, so I don't want to read the book with the two boys called Two Boys Kissing. Okay. Now, I mean, David Levithan, by the way, the book is called Two Boys Kissing, and it's awesome, but he also is telling you what it is right from the beginning, right? So if somebody says, listen, I struggle with that because of this, then I'd be like, okay, well, let's talk about your faith and figure out
Right.
what it is. You know, I had
I am surprised how often I'm talking about faith on this show when I'm not, that's not why we're here. But I mean, I consider myself a Christian, and the people who are offended by things like that are not real Christians, because all you have to do to be a Christian is to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. If you are offended by someone being themselves, then you are not a Christian.
I could not agree more. The problem also comes, one time I had a 2-hour conversation with the student on the phone with him, helping him write a paper, because I never grade them on their opinion, just on their paper. And his paper was objectively bad. I had 2 hours helping him write a paper saying gay marriage should be illegal. I had to help him write that paper. Me. That sucked. But
that is completely unfair. but
I have to do my job, right? So what am I going to fail him for having an opinion about which I disagree? The problem is, as part of our conversation went, I learned he was a born again Christian. So he had only really been a Christian for like a week and a half. Not really, but you know what I mean?
So he didn't know what it meant to be a Christian yet.
And it blew his mind when I said, okay, well, what translation are you reading? He's like, what do you mean, what translation? I'm like, well, what version, what edition are you reading? He's like, well, the Good News one. I'm like, so the one that's in like modern English? He's like, right, that's the one. So I had to
schooling him on Christianity.
I had to teach him in reverse order, understanding like the Good News version is based on the King James version, which is based on a German translation, which is based on blah, and back, and how it was spoken in Aramaic, but written in Greek, and ancient Greek and modern Greek aren't the same thing. He had no idea any of that happened. It just, in his mind, it was written in modern English, and it says these things. So that
bless
version
you for having the empathy to have this conversation with him and not just attack him for his faith.
It was pretty painful. And at the end of the day, he still wrote a paper that he got, he got a B on the paper because I wasn't going to let him get anything. I was just dragging him across the line because he just
put in the work.
So, right. And so that is part of it. So in that conversation, I got to understand him and where he's coming from. And I'm not going to move him. I'm not going to suddenly make him not born again. But I also thought, well, if I don't have the conversation with you, if I don't know where you're coming from, I can't get why you think this. Because if you just say this and then and it's easy to just want to walk away from somebody who's being a closed-minded asshole. I want to walk away from people. And in my life, I'm more inclined to walk away from the closed-minded asshole, but in my job, I can't.
You can, but you choose not to because you want to do your job well.
Of course, sure. Yeah.
So let's get into today's job, which is discussing 1984. As recently as February of 2022, Barnes & Noble announced the top 10 banned and challenged books in libraries and schools, and the list included 2 novels by George Orwell, Animal Farm and 1984, both published in the mid to late 1940s. Several years before Orwell published either book, he spoke against censorship in a 1941 BBC talk titled Literature and Totalitarianism. In it, he stated several quotes. The first one is, totalitarianism it not only forbids you to express, even to think certain thoughts, but it dictates what you shall think. Another is, the most characteristic activity of the Nazis is burning books. And last, it is especially difficult to see literary merit in a book with whose conclusions you disagree. Now, fast forward to 2022, and 1984 is still being banned, mostly for social and political themes, sometimes for sexual content. In one instance, it was specifically banned for being pro-communism. I think it's telling that 1984 portrays an omnipresent government that sucks away individuality from its citizens. And because this book offers insight to those under leadership of oppressive regimes, it has been banned and even burned in countries all around the world. Most people are introduced to this book as a part of required curriculum in secondary or high school, sometimes college or university level. How did you first hear about this book and what prompted you to read it? And we'll start with Jack.
I don't think I was one of those people that did it at school. However, I was definitely of school age when I first read it. I tell this story quite a bit, depending on the podcast and what we're talking about. But I did go through a phase of not reading. I just fell out of love of it for whatever reason. I don't know if everyone does or if it was something particular to me or a time in my life where, you know, football and girls and whatever it might be. Yeah, I know, not you, Tonya, I know, don't worry. But
Yeah, but he did the hat switch.
I definitely just wasn't picking up books anymore. And that
For
hadn't
those
been a
only listening, we should say what
yeah,
your
go
hat
for it.
says, Cody.
It says fight evil, read books. Yes.
Go ahead,
So
Jack.
Jack,
Sorry.
I get it, man. We hear this all the time when we talk. Like people give us our
I know.
comic book origin stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
comics
Yeah.
particularly, wasn't it? But I mean, I was doing it with novels as well, with prose. I don't
Yeah.
know why. Just, you know, it was something I'd always done. I had my library card, and I grew up in quite a small town. We could just walk ourselves to the library, and all of that was happening. And I just fell out of love with it. And then my mum and my stepdad, they were big readers and actually book collectors. They'd scour antique fairs collecting books and hardcovers and specific spines and all that kind of stuff. And then one day they just sat me down and it was, you know, a host of books. Now, whether 1984 was definitely in that pile, I'm not sure, or whether it came shortly after that kind of like explosion in my interest again. But they sat me down one day and said, look, it's so important. You've got to get back into reading. Same conversation I have virtually every day now with my students. You know, you've got to keep your reading level up. You've got to be engaging that part of your brain. It's a muscle, the same as any other in your body. And, you know, all those conversations I always have. And they gave me a few books and said, you're going to read these. And we guarantee by the time you've read these, your life will be changed. And you know, I really don't
Wow.
want to say it. I really don't want to say it because, you know, who wants to admit parents are correct? But they were right. Amongst those was definitely To Kill a Mockingbird and definitely High Fidelity because I can just transport myself back there now to that age and see myself almost, you know, like floating above in my bedroom, devouring those two books particularly. And High Fidelity particularly is one I've read almost every year ever since, I would say. So either 1984 was in that pile or it came very shortly after that. And I guess that makes sense because of the type of books, you know, they were giving me populist stuff. You know, High Fidelity is populist, but it does, you know, it does have social undercurrent and it does have subtext to it. Obviously, To Kill a Mockingbird is massively important in what it's doing and what it's saying. I'm pretty sure Handmaid's Tale was there, which shows the level of trust they were giving me because, as you said, it's only a very challenging book, but has a completely different perspective to the other two that I've been talking about. So perhaps that's where 1984 came in. I'd read Handmaid's Tale and I was like, oh, what else can I find like this? So it came to me at an important time in my life. Young teenage, maybe what they would call tweens now, I think is a term. There's probably a new one now. I'm old. I'm not sure if tween exists anymore.
I still say tween, so I'm old. I'm older than you. So
there's probably something else that
Yeah.
there's probably 3 or 4 iterations that have passed me by that I've missed. That sort of age where, and then from then that's been it. So probably another 30 years really. So thank you, Mum.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That just
Think about
gets
how
my
different that
heart.
story would be if they only gave you British authors.
Quite. Well, exactly.
Well,
yeah, you're absolutely right.
They
Yeah.
just exposed you to worldwide material there.
They did.
Like we'll
'Cause I
throw
think
this British guy in, but
Yeah.
it's
yeah.
you, Rob. I mean, High Fidelity.
Yeah.
Nick's British too. Yeah. Oh, I love that story. Give your
Yeah,
mom a hug.
me too.
Yeah. I know.
Our
Kind
parents
of
are-
explains Rhea too, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So what about you, Tony? Your
Well,
first experience with the book?
I read it when I was 11, which was 1984. So I
How
was,
cool is that?
yeah. So my middle school, and where I grew up, we didn't do a straight junior high, where some parts of America, and I don't know how it is for you guys, Tonya, some parts of America do junior high where it's 7th, 8th, and 9th, and then high school is 10, 11, and 12, and then elementary is primary school is K through 6. Where I'm from, little tiny town in the middle of nowhere, Michigan, we did K through 5 or K through 4, 5 through 8, which is a mistake, but that was our middle school, 5th graders and 8th graders in the same building, and then high school 9 through 12. And so, so I was young. My birthday's in the summer, so I graduated high school at 17. So I started middle school as 11. I'm in middle school with like 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds. Some of them are 15 in 8th grade, 14 to 15. So it was a mess. And but my middle school it was 1984, so the whole middle school is plastered with Big Brothers watching, and the 7th and 8th graders were reading it as part of the curriculum. But it was
you have to make it a thing when it's 1984, right?
For sure. Yeah. So it's
get
in
another
the curriculum. Yeah, it's just everywhere in the curriculum. It's all over the building. You walk so the 5th and 6th graders, we had our own hallway, and we still had recess. We had a playground, but so like you had to go through the building for other things. So the 8th grade hallway, you weren't allowed down, but you could get through the 7th grade hallway when you get to the office. So it was just everywhere, all over the cafeteria, all over the gym, Big Brothers watching everywhere. So my parents were never one to say no to me when it came to reading stuff, like when John Lennon was killed and when Mark David Chapman shot Ronald Reagan, all in the name of Catcher in the Rye. They were like, okay. I'm like, what is that? And I'm like, here, go read it. So I did. I read that, at 8, 7 actually. So didn't understand it, by the way, at all.
I was going to say, did you get it?
No, but it is still to this day one of my all-time favorite books, and I've read it several times, over and over. I have a Holden Road sign actually above my door. Like I committed a felony to steal a road sign that says Holden. So that book is quite important to me. However, so this book I didn't fully understand either, to be fair, as 11. But boy, did I love it. And it sent me down the path of dystopian literature. So then, of course, my mother's like, oh, then you got to read Brave New World if you're going to read 1984. And then, you stumbled across the other things that you find. So yeah, Brave New World right there. Yeah. So I think this is a better book than Brave New World. But really, recently, last year, 2 years ago, I finally found the book called We, which is the Russian version of 1984, upon which 1984 is like the book couldn't get published. And somehow Orwell got his claws on it. So he massaged it enough to write this book because it was a way to get the book out of Russia by kind of rewriting it. Very good. It's called We. It's fucking amazing. I didn't know about it until I read like a biography of 1984. So like somebody wrote like the book, like a biography of the book and how it came to be and how it got banned and everything. And I read that last year. And so then or 2 years ago, so then I discovered We. So it sent me down. So I've read it often. I would lose count. I'm almost 50. I would have to say I've read it 25 to 30 times.
Wow.
I love it. I just reread it just the other day, getting ready for this. I own several copies. I've got audiobooks. So for me, that's how I came to it, because it was just what the school was doing. And my parents never said no to me reading a book. They were never like, I mean, I suspect if I was like, hey, D.H. Lawrence, then maybe she would have been like, you can wait till high school for Lady Chatterley's Lover.
I'm not ready to have those conversations with you, kid.
Right. I mean, that didn't come up anywhere, so I didn't read that. But, that might have been the only foot they would have put down. But whatever I wanted, I mean, it was the 70s, and the 70s were trying to kill us, as I always say. So I could just walk to the library, and I had my own library card, and whatever I wanted. My neighbors were big book nerds, and they had their own private library, so we could just go over and take whatever they wanted us to have. I actually have Marvin's, the thing I have of his is his version of Scarlet Letter, which I also read far too young, because that probably one that I have. It's like from the 1800s, like an 1853 edition of Scarlet Letter. So books just were there. So once I wanted it, I got it, and it's just a big deal to me.
So when you first read it, were you aware that it was a banned book?
No, because my whole school was promoting it. There was no way I could have known.
Well, they could have promoted it and said it's banned in other places. They could have taught the fact that it was banned.
My teachers weren't teaching it. Those were the upper level teachers, right? So no, I didn't have a clue until later.
So what was your first experience knowing that it was banned?
probably by the time I got into high school. And then you start learning about what banned books are, and you start realizing, I think it was probably when we were discussing, because I just read things, whatever the schools, like your parents, Jack, like whatever they were going to assign, I probably had already read it before, just because, once you start reading, your parents are like, well, what are you going to read? Oh, here's this. So I've read Of Mice and Men. So I'm probably sure it was Of Mice and Men when I started realizing that was banned. And then you kind of lead into the conversations. I'm sure it was just something I read on my own. I don't remember it being a specific conversation. But when I found out this was one, it was like, but why?
Yeah, and that's my next question is, what stood out to you as reasons that people might want to ban it?
It's really difficult to understand what it might be. And I think, Tonya, you said something, and like, I know Tony made a face, because I read something, I didn't do too much. So I wanted to come to this quite fresh. I thought I'd just have a quick little browse around. I read the similar thing, that it got banned for being pro-communist, but at the exact same time, it got banned for being anti-communist. I mean,
Right.
if that doesn't sum up the whole
Double
that's
think.
it. Like, click stop recording. We're done. Yeah, double perfect. Tony. Yeah, like, if that doesn't sum up why books shouldn't be banned, I don't know what does. Like, and it just boils down to like, one person's decided, I've got this opinion, I don't want that to be expressed because I don't like it. I can't see what is in this that would offend somebody. I find it really difficult. I know you mentioned there's this sexual content, but actually, by today's standards, it feels very tame. I mean, you mentioned Lady Chatterley's Lover. I've never read that book. I have, and too young, switched over onto the channel when channel flicking when there's been an adaptation on TV, and I've been like, whoa, probably too young. Like, I'm not interested in that. I'm going to turn over again. But I know what's going on in that book. I can't, unless you want to run an oppressive totalitarian regime, and you don't want people to know what that is, I'm not sure why you would need to ban it.
That could be the key right there.
Yeah, it's one of those things. What I always say about 1984 is, this is not a book of instructions. And that's
Sure.
that is why my shirt is important, because you're like, oh, this is fiction. You're supposed to read this and be like,
right.
Oh, yeah.
This is how you do
it's starting
it.
to storm here. I forget where this is a video, so it's starting to storm, so it's getting dark. Yeah, this is not a how-to book, you idiots. But of course, it is. It is a how-to book if you want to, but it's also supposed to be a warning. So yeah, I think the reason that We was banned is
it wasn't written as a how-to book. That's your point.
No.
Correct. But the problem is what happens is the governments ban this book because they don't want to let people in on the secret. And especially when you get to the part of the book of the Goldstein book, like, to me, that's the part where it's like, ooh, that's a little too close. Like, the rest of this, we can fictionalize it and whatever, and the hope leaves in the pearls, and I'll meet you in the place where there's no darkness, and ooh, room 101, there's no way they could know all this. And, they can say that's just science fiction. But then when you get to the book, the Goldstein's book, when Winston is reading chapters 1 and 3 of Goldstein's book, and we're then reading chapters 1 and 3 of Goldstein's book, which I seem to remember probably the first time I read it, I was like heavy lifting. Then I'm like, is this a history book now? Like, I didn't you're 11.
I'll be honest, I felt it a little bit this time too. I was like, come on, let's get.
Are we still doing this part?
Yeah. But
it reminded me of the chapter in Atlas Shrugged that everyone reads only once. Like, all right, got it.
John Galt's 50-page speech. Yeah.
Got it. Still going. Okay.
He goes on and on. And imagine, like, in that book, he's actually giving a radio address, and you're like, is anyone still listening, John?
Right.
You are really.
Everyone went to go get a snack.
He is still talking. Yeah, that is a lot. You're right. It's like a 50-page soliloquy. Nobody ever told Ayn Rand to edit. That's the thing, though. Yeah, she also has a version. She has a version of this. Really, I use it in class. It's called Anthem. It's very good. It's a novella. It's amazeballs. She's actually really salty about this book because she wrote Anthem in 1938. So the fact that Brave New World in 1984 got more famous than she did, she got a little salty about. Rightfully so, to be fair. But everybody hated her too because she was an asshole. So there's that. But I would say
or
that,
was she just a woman who didn't know her place?
No, she totally knew her place, and it was not for you to tell her anything. But she
Yeah.
is, I mean, like historically too. I mean, I'm a fan of her, but she also is an asshole. Like
Yeah, she
historically,
did.
like
She did rub some people the wrong way, and
100%. Yeah. But I think it's the governments would like you to ban this book for those two sections, because they're like,
yeah,
if you're giving away all the secrets and you're telling us that the hope lies in the proles, and that we're acknowledging if the proles could just get their shit together, we'd be fucked.
yes,
There's no government. That's part of why we was banned in Russia, was because they didn't want the Russian people to get their hands on it. And it's just so funny because this book is out. It's freely available. People are trying to ban it, but you can still buy it. Nobody's stopping a bookstore from selling it, right? You can't stop a bookstore from selling it. You may kid it out of your library. You may do these other things. So the book still exists. And yet we've fallen for it. We keep falling for it, and it's so frustrating. So that's the only reason I could think anybody would ban it, is because they're like, oh shit, don't give away. It's like Penn and Teller aren't going to write a secret. It's called, or write a book called Here's How We Do the Tricks.
right.
That's what 1984 is. It's like, here's what we're doing. Pay attention.
Yeah, it's a warning, not a how-to.
One hundo. Oh, makes me salty. Sorry, I'm all fired up now.
It's all right. You have anything to add to that, Jack?
To Tony's brilliance.
Stop.
No, I think you're right. But yeah, the trouble is, I don't know. I was going to start breaking down like yeah, what Orwell wants us to do as the proles to rise up, but
Yeah.
there's not. I don't know if it's that age-old thing of like the people that are going to read this are not going to be. I don't know. Like, are you in the position to make a big enough difference, or the people who need to put this in the hands of that can make a big enough difference? Are they going to read it? Or I know you're exactly right, and I guess that is the section. And you know, like I say, I'll reiterate what I said before. I personally, I found that pretty heavy lifting, and I felt myself skim reading some of that rather than the depth I know I given other sections too. And that's a personal thing, because I'll be honest, anything kind of historical, other than, you know, I know if we don't know from history, we're doomed to repeat ourselves. I completely agree with that sentiment. But heavy, detailed history stuff sends my eyes going a little bit off. Actually, my eldest is really into history, which is great. So I'm just going to learn from him as he grows. So I did struggle a little bit with that section. But you're right that's the bit which really it's revealing.
I think the difference is, Jack, the whole book isn't like that. So
No,
there's a definite difference in the feel. Like, we're moving along, things are happening, we're getting new material, and then it's like, oh, we're just gonna sit and read a book. Like, it doesn't
here's some
feel
information.
like if it were on screen, it wouldn't feel very cinematic. You know, it's like,
No.
oh, this is what we're doing.
Mm.
Okay, we're still reading this book. Okay.
Which I guess is his point, right? I guess he wants this to hit the brakes and to stop
Yeah.
it to feel different. And unfortunately, it didn't have the desired effect on me on this read. But who knows next time? Now I'm sort of prepared, and it's in my head again that's coming. As I'm getting there, I'll know it's coming again, so I'll be a bit more ready for it. I think it'd been long enough since I've read this book. This is probably only my third time, I would have thought. Like, as a full
I had
read.
forgotten that there was that big of a chunk that was
Yeah.
just dedicated to that.
And I was finding myself like 5 minutes and sort of, how many pages of this are left? I'm going to go and race Mario Kart for 10 minutes, and I'll come back to whatever it
And
might be.
that could have something to do with the way our attention spans are different now.
100%.
This couldn't get published with that chapter like that unless it was a big famous author already. It would be, all right, you're going to have to break this up with some activity, you know.
Well, literally, Julia falls asleep. I mean,
right.
He's like on the nose. He's telling everybody, hey, one of the characters in this book falls asleep during this part.
The one you thought was the most radical, actually, up until this point.
Right.
Yeah.
She's bored by it. She's like, whatever, bored now.
Yeah. Even Orwell knew. God, smart guy.
The thing is, all of this is true about this section, but just as three writers nerding out for a second, for him to be like, hold my beer, I'm writing this book, and it is written in this language. Look at me. I'm totally getting you sucked in, and it's dark, and the descriptions of his varicose ulcer, and then all this stuff, like detail. And he's like, all right, here's this. Oh, and I'm going to come right back. Just wanted you to know I could do it.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, okay.
It's like a completely different author. It's amazing.
It
And
is amazing.
yeah,
You
yeah.
believe it's a different author. It's
Yeah.
not, that's just it. When
But
there's
it
a
should
book in
feel
a
like a
book,
different author because
it's
he's reading
so
another
good.
book. If it had the same voice, then it would be like, this is lame. This
That
is
is
just the author on
skill.
a diatribe, you know?
Right.
It's the thing I'm
Like
sure we've
John
all
Galt.
spoken. Sure, thing we've all spoken about before. When you read these books, which are meant to have different narrative voices, and sometimes you're like, oh, like it's the author but slightly tweaked. It feels like the same voice, even though it's a different character. It's a real skill, I think, to write different narrative voices within a story. Do you know what I mean, if each chapter, I've read some of these books where like each chapter's titled by the character that's going to lead the narration. To actually make that feel different, I think is unbelievably skilled, and he does that here. And who am I to say how skillful Orwell is? We all know that. All the stuff is done up until this point with the newspeak and
Oh,
the invented.
right.
And when you see the kind of code that Winston's looking at, and it's might as well be a foreign language, and then he comes to explain what that means and the intelligence of some of the words that he comes up with. Obviously doublethink Tony, yeah, is just ingenious by itself. I was just quickly trying to have a look because there's a couple I
The
noted down.
thought that was put into it.
Yeah, and like the ones that particularly stood out to me was face crime. Like it's so simple on the outside, but what it's saying to you is so deep that these poor people are just constantly living their life having to measure every single movement, every tweak of their face, and
No
then
more
the other
resting
one's
bitch face, right?
no.
no, wipe that look off your face. Yeah. It's amazing. Well, it's like, again, there was like this skill, like, because obviously Roddenberry does it with,
Sure.
and so does Tolkien. It's
Mm,
amazing.
yeah,
You're like,
that's who
you
came to
assholes,
mind.
you just made up a whole language with like grammar and syntax and everything. And there's some versions of the book that actually have like the whole explanation at the back of the book.
Yeah,
Like,
I've got that in mind.
here's the explanation of Newspeak. Yeah, the principles of Newspeak. Do you have that one at the back? Holy shit. You're like, okay, not only did I make it up, but I'm also going to explain it to you in yet a third voice.
I'll be honest.
Okay.
Another thing I started reading and then maybe stopped before I got to the end.
It doesn't affect that has no effect on the story. Yeah.
Right. You didn't need that part. That was extra credit. You didn't need that
It was
part.
just him showing off.
Yeah. Yeah, Tolkien is the one the chief that comes to mind, isn't it? That this world is so lived in, so believable, which is really, really scary. And so now, unfortunately, in many ways recognizable, which is where our conversation's I guess going to lead to. That and that's all done by him. Like this word he's created, the language that he uses. You said something like the descriptive vocabulary of things. And I watched the movie last night in prep because I've never seen it before. Actually, I thought, well, I finished the book.
I haven't seen it either.
I wouldn't bother. Really, is where I got to. I'll be honest. I was struggling to stay awake, and it was not. I said earlier, I'm a bit of a night owl. Generally, for me, it's I'm in school holidays at the moment, so I'm up till all hours. 1 o'clock's probably an early night for me at the moment, but it was 10 o'clock at night, and I was sitting there nodding. It was difficult. It just didn't capture the atmosphere or the tone of the book at all. What it did was showed me scenes from the book, but I've read the book. It didn't capture that feel. And John Hurt is excellent actually as Winston, which is a real shame. It's just everything
he
around
put it all
him.
in, boy. He went all in, and he really did all that stuff to himself. I mean, that's talk about getting into character. Yeah, the
and too much focus on that, to be honest.
Yeah,
in a 90-minute film, an hour in, we've moved on to the final section, part 3 of this book, which actually, as we know, is very thin. It's very small. This section, really, once Winston and Julia have been captured, that section's slight, really, because there's only so much you can do with it.
Right.
So maybe watch Equilibrium instead.
Equilibrium is very good. Sure.
Maybe after we finish recording tonight. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just because Em and I saw a theatre production of it a few years ago, actually, pre-Second Child, pre-Our Child, and I think that did a better job of capturing the tone. The restricted space on the stage actually turns out to be perfect for the story you're trying to tell. And it measured the balance between the 3 parts of this book much better, I thought.
So I do want to switch gears a little bit and talk about something. This is something I always have to think about when I am deciding to do a project like this. And I know that you think about it, Tony, and I'm guessing that it's something that weighs on you as well, Jack. a lot of speculation has been made about the dangers of perpetuating curriculum composed of cis white male authors. And I definitely know that, especially Tony, that you consider this when you're choosing the books that you present to your classrooms. Do you think it's important to keep 1984 on the list? And if so, why?
I do. I think I don't think you only keep 1984 on the list. This is why my students read Anthem, right? We read more than just this. You read the other versions of it. I have taught Atwood before. Dystopian literature, there's so many great voices in there, and and if it's done well, dystopian literature is obviously, as Jack said, is really reflecting on the now. It's reflecting on when it was written, but it's always reflecting on the now. If it's good dystopian literature, it lasts. And so this is good dystopian literature. So it's not Orwell's fault that he's a straight white dude. He also has an amazing perspective that we need to include. He, and I hate to say this, another straight white dude that I don't want to remove is Kipling, who is like Orwell, is British, but not really, right? They didn't grow up on the island. They grew up in India. They cut their teeth as children and as young workers and as journalists, seeing the British Empire from another perspective. And I think their perspective is super important. But I don't want it to only be cis white male guys. So I don't want to say no, I don't, because I think that's just another form of banning.
It is.
So, as somebody who has a women's studies, minor, my English major, women's studies minor, the whole point of women's studies, we always, as you're taking those classes, feminist theory and the different things, it was always like, eventually this minor will, in the dream world, this minor will cease to exist. We don't need a women in US history. We don't need a women in world history. We don't need a women in literature course, because they'll just be in the history literature courses. They'll just exist there.
Right, like Black History Month. We won't need a month if it were just included in the history.
In history, exactly. Women's history, same thing. So I think you pick and choose, but the goodies are goodies for a reason, and I don't say you just throw every Hemingway in there, because not all Hemingway is created equal, right? You don't throw all Faulkner in there, but you still.
And I didn't mean to put you on the defensive in any way.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not on the defensive.
I included it. I think it's important, but
yeah,
you guys are both teachers.
I think it's totally important, but I do think, because to me, there was some Faulkner I read that I'm like, we could skip this. This sucked balls. Why couldn't we read? You know what I mean? Like, why didn't we read some more, whatever, fill in the blank, give me some more, give me Toni Morrison rubs me the wrong way. She's a brilliant writer, but her books are hard to read a second time, right? Her books are hard.
I have one of hers on the list. We're doing Beloved.
That you do. I'll never read it a second time. I'll never read any of her books a second time, but I'm glad I've read all of her books the first time, because. Which
is what you said about Margaret Atwood.
100%. And it's so for like me, Gloria Naylor, I got to meet her. I love her. I think she's a brilliant writer. She's amazing. And so I've taught her book several times. I'll reread her books all the time, but again, equally uncomfortable, excellent writer. So, you could balance it out. You keep the Orwell, but you put Gloria, you teach. I've taught Toni Morrison, even though it's hard, you teach it because I want my students. I used to teach teacher prep students. So I need to make sure you're reading everything. So that's my rant over. Sorry. And I know, Jack, you would probably have less choice in what you get to pick, right?
That's how I was going to start. Yeah, unfortunately, that I don't have that level of freedom. But what we do have is a chance to be creative around it. So as I say, we've lost from our GCSE syllabus. We've lost from those key exam years anybody who's not British currently, and that's still in place, I'm afraid to say, at the moment.
That's still the case. I didn't realize.
So you move of Mice and Men down, and you teach it to the year group down, and you introduce it there. And what you do is you bring in poetry. So we teach John Angard, we teach Benjamin Zephaniah, we teach obviously female poets. So I was desperately trying to run through my head as you were talking, Tony, then, of like all the other poets that we teach. So we find creative ways to get around it. We work with history during Black History Month to make sure we're tying ideas together in that period. And we put up we did a display a couple of years ago. I think it was around the time we met, actually, Tony, where we put up a display in the English corridor of books that we've read, where we felt inspired and we've learned something from culture or from other people's culture. And then we have the things where we celebrate. I put up Scott Pilgrim and was like, bet you didn't know. because they'd seen the movie and they didn't know even maybe necessarily it was a comic book, and then who that comic book was by and what his background was. And so unfortunately we don't have as much creativity, but we do try. And obviously I teach in English, which I don't know about in America, but it is still a predominantly female-led subject in terms of the numeracy of teachers. I would say there's probably far more female teachers than there are male English teachers. So students are already experiencing just by walking in a classroom the importance of thinking about past the cis white male. I think ultimately I agree with what you said, Tony, that we don't just say none, because that's not right either, but we certainly make sure we say this one because it's important and it's got something to say and it should continue to be in the curriculum, but we don't need all of these because they're kind of the same. So what can we put in that's going to provide a different perspective, an original idea, a new thought process, a chance to experience something from somebody that you wouldn't get otherwise, I think is what needs to happen. And I do think if you're working in the right place, or if you've got the right mindset of the team you're with, or your head of department, or whatever it might be, you can work in the grey and you can make that happen.
I agree. I'm teaching Gatsby right now to adults because they all thought they read Gatsby when they were 16, and then they realized I didn't understand what that fucking book was about. Because why would you have a 16-year-old read Gatsby? They don't understand it. One of my favorite things to do in discussion, because my discussions are all written, I believe this. This isn't just me playing devil's advocate. I really, truly believe this, that Jordan Baker is not white. I think Jordan Baker is passing. I did the air
I
quotes,
can see
everybody.
that perspective.
The way that she is described all the time, and you're like, oh, it's because she's a golfer, so she's tan. I'm like, her hands are in gloves. She's a golfer. Her hands would be a different color than her skin, but they're not. That's intentionally described. And there's the whole line about, like, anytime Tom starts to go on his weird racist rants, Jordan and Daisy are all like, oh, we're all white here. That's the line. And you're like, oh, we had a lovely white childhood, because it's my contention that Jordan's grandmother worked for Daisy's family. That's what I think happened, and that Jordan and Daisy grew up together that way. But because she could pass, and because she's this beauty, and she's a golfer, and she's all these things, and she's Daisy's friend, that was good enough to get her in the door, right? Oh, well, you're tan because you golf. And like everybody keeps saying that, but Nick's like, but her hands are golden. He describes her all the time as being golden. So that's a fun conversation to have. So it's important too to be like, here's the straight white guy giving you the villain of the piece is a racist prick. And then have this, and there's Jewish people in there and how they're treated. Gatsby's friends are Jewish. And so I think it's really important to do, because again, Fitzgerald had his own demons and his own problem, but you could really look at him as being an ally before that was a word.
Right.
Having a commentary on racism through the perspective, it's like the same thing. Like you talked about To Kill a Mockingbird. Got to keep reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I know it offends people. I understand people think like, why is the old white lady the only person we get to talk about racism? And like, it's from the perspective of a little girl. That's the point. Like, of course, the way that race is handled in there is really basic, because that's what she's trying to show you, is that you have to get down to this understanding of what Scout understands so that you can evolve. Like the hero of the book is not Atticus Finch, it's Calpurnia. And anybody who says I am our house, we're anti-Atticus Finch in this house. We're like, he's the world's
I think these
worst
two have just announced what book they're doing next year.
Oh, maybe. But you know what I mean? So it's like, I think you read the book, even though people are like, well, why do we got to have the old white lady as the voice of anti-racism? And again, you don't only have the old white lady.
Well, white saviorism had to start somewhere.
Right. And, right. Atticus is the white savior, but he's not, to me, Calpurnia is the savior of the book, not Atticus. Like, that's how I read it. I think Atticus is, I'm not a fan. But like, you read her, and then you read Zora Neale Hurston too, right? You read Their Eyes Were Watching God, and then you're like, oh, let's talk about these two Southern books, Florida, Alabama. Let's have the conversation.
From different perspectives.
Yes. And then that's why you keep reading it, because I think To Kill a Mockingbird is beautiful and almost perfect. I mean, it may be the best work of American fiction ever, but boy, Their Eyes Are Watching God is right up there. It's beautiful. Have you ever read that? Either of you read Their Eyes Are Watching God?
Can't believe you're even
Tonya.
asking that.
Huh? What's that?
I can't believe you're even asking that.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. I love that book. Zora Neale Hurston is a queen. She's amazing. But so to me, that's why you don't do it, because you still need the perspective. And like you said, Jack, if you just get rid of, if you're only reading British people, then you're losing the perspective to explain why is it British. Like if you're saying,
Sure.
you know, you don't
Right.
understand if you only have Coke, you don't understand why you like it over Pepsi or RC or Dr. Pepper or whatever. If you need the variety, and you got to
Yeah,
have
you
the
don't want to be,
comparison.
this is just the way I've always done it. Like, this
And
is
what-
just what I've always had. That is not okay. Like, we don't
No.
want that.
And what even is British anyway? Do you know what I mean? Like, when they say only by British authors, what does that mean? Like people born and raised and never left here, or like, as you said, do we take
Right.
out Kipling? Do we take out Orwell? Because are they? So yeah,
They
it's a
count?
tangled
Like, what
web, isn't it?
counts
Yeah.
as British?
Quite.
Just, is it
Yeah, because
what,
they
what's on
left
your
the island.
passport?
How dare they?
You know?
How dare they? Absolutely. So they're coming in with an outsider's perspective on certain things, or they've grown from being somewhere else. That can't
Yeah.
possibly be British. Yeah, it's very frustrating, and you can imagine. You know, I imagine most teachers, but certainly most English teachers, are empathetic and left-leaning. So we weren't massively impressed by that idea. I think what you said there, Tony, is the key. It's conversation. Not a year will go by where either a child or a parent will complain about Of Mice and Men and the language in there, and that's their prerogative to do that. Quite a lot we get complaints about Macbeth because of the supernatural and the witches. So parents, we've even had students withdrawn from classes and they're not learning.
I love that it's the supernatural and the witches, not the infanticide.
Not the
Yeah,
murder.
No, that's fine. But actually, you know, they're sometimes the best moments of teaching is having those conversations. And I'm very careful how I start teaching Of Mice and Men. And I say each student gets to make the decision on whether they say that word or not. That's up to them. However, we will not judge anyone that says that word, because it is in this book and it's in this book for a reason, and it's there to reveal this about, as you said, Tony, it reveals something about the character that's saying it. Look at the characters that choose to use that word. Now, for me, if I'm reading that part of the text, because I've made my class comfortable, I will read it. Some teachers choose not to. I think it's all prerogative. I think it's all choice. I think, I guess I would probably, I'd like us all to be on board, really. And I think I think if I was head of department, which I will never be, because I do not have the skill set or time or patience or motivation to do anything like that. But I guess I would like to promote that idea, because I think it's, again, that thing of like, if we're shying away from it, we're continuing to give that word and that moment power. Whereas if we're owning it in the room in a safe space and we're talking about why it's there, then I think that's a growing experience for everybody. But as long as it's been, we're coming back to where we started. That was my pause, sorry. As long as it's been written, it doesn't matter who it's been written by, but it's been written in order to start that conversation for people to learn or to grow or to understand within the context of the use of it, or back to 1984, of what Orwell's trying to tell us, what he's trying to warn us about. I think we can't ban that. We can't take that away. We can't censor it, is another word I suppose we could be using here. It needs to be experienced.
So, Jack, final thoughts. Why do you recommend 1984, and what do you hope people will gain from reading it?
Well, I think it's a bloody good read. I think it's something which, for 8/10, 9/10 of it, it's very hard to put down. It compels you to discover more about the world, about these characters. It's constantly moving and it changes its story. So when you get into part 2 with Juliet and Winston and their relationship, it surprises you with where it goes in the world. I never expected to see countryside, and I'm like, well, if that's not the world I saw, so I now want to know more about that. And we were talking about Orwell's writing. I think his narrative flow has a completely different feel in that section, which matches the kind of romanticism. I think it's very, so I think you're going to get an understanding of a writer's process once you delve into it a little bit, and the skill set of a writer and the way that they are telling a story. I think that's one whole thing that's really important to read this book for. And of course, the most important thing is the idea of don't blindly trust your government. Don't, challenge everything you hear, challenge everything that you are told is right, and find your truth of what you're surrounded by. I'm not sure there is a truth. I know, Tony, you had your lovely hat at the start. Facts are important.
Yeah.
Facts matter. But depending on who's delivering you that fact, you've got to source that. You've got to check that. You've got to find that truth. So I think they're my two reasons why. If you're passionate about writing, you want to learn about writing, you want to be a writer, I think you can get so much from this book. But then I think if you consider the message of it, you're right, Tony, it will never not be relevant, this book. Unless Gene Roddenberry, his vision comes to pass, and then it'll be fine. Then we won't ban it. We'll just put it in a glass case and say,
can you imagine?
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness Orwell wrote this book. He saved us.
Yeah. But until that day comes.
I know. It's so funny, though, because Roddenberry, right, he clearly, it's a utopian future. And while people find Star Trek to be kind of boring, I don't.
I mean, they're wrong.
They're wrong.
As we will prove.
As we will prove.
Sorry, Tonya, a little bit of cross-promotion.
Coming
soon. I hadn't heard that.
And we're going to end the year watching the original series in honor of Nichelle. Nice. But we, I agree with everything that you're saying there, Jack. I think, I mean, just when you think about it, like I'm 11 years old and I picked this up and it was a bright, cold day in April and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. Fuck you, man. That's the opening of a book.
You just set the world. Ugh.
Everything in one. I mean, that's a 2-sentence paragraph, which my students, by the way, don't write a 2-sentence paragraph and have it be that long because you're not George Orwell. But the fact is that somebody with that kind of skill set, so it is beautifully written. If you learn, we as writers,
even the ugly parts are beautifully written.
Oh my God, he's amazing. And that's it. That's ugly. This is ugly. The next thing talks about the smell of cabbage. And you're like, oh, you taste it in your mouth. And you're like, and just even 11 years old saying the clock struck 13, I didn't know what that meant. So then I had to go learn. Talk about, my dad was in the Navy. So I was like, what the hell? And he's like, oh, right. Why would you know military? We don't do that in America. So he had to, then I learned like, okay, now I know.
Which is silly.
Yeah. But that we don't do 24-hour clocks here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so much
contrarian.
Clearer. Like, everybody knows what time we mean. There's no question.
Yeah. I know. It's silly, but I think you're right that he is a beautiful writer and he sucks you in. And so that's obviously everything, because you guys mostly when you do English, Jack, right? You say read this and then learn how to write from reading, where we like break it down a little bit more and we're really focused more like on sentence structure and diagramming sentences. That's how we teach how to read. I think you're better suited to learn how to write by reading good stuff and then having a process conversation. Mm-hmm. You can't get better. He was a journalist too. He does everything. He's a quadruple threat. So, but I think the most important, I recommend it to people because what you said, Jack, is true. The idea that you need to do your own digging and not the way that people say it. Now, I've done my own research and I asked Alec Jones. I've been
on Wikipedia or I've asked next door. Or,
right.
This was trending.
I asked my crazy uncle. The idea being that what this book tells you to do is not just question your government, and question authority. Of course it does that, but it's also asking you to question yourself. Mm-hmm. Why do you believe what you believe? If your reason is, I believe it because I've always believed it, then you need to stop and go back and figure out where did that belief come from and walk it backwards. And that research isn't quick. Research isn't just getting on the telescreen or reading the approved material or getting on the internet. Reading is deep and thoughtful and going to different sources and reading what the other side thinks. There's a magazine I read called The Week Magazine, and that's what they do. Like here, every issue, the first 10 pages are, here's the main story, totally objective, facts. Here's what the pundits say, here's what the editorial, here's what the analysts say, here's what the pundits say. So you're like, here it is, here's like some political analysis from like a political scientist or a historian, then here's what the right says, here's what the left says. So every issue that you read about, you're seeing all sides of it in this one magazine. And it's like, perfect. That's doing the research, and it does it for you. And it's, you can get it free from the library. So that's what I do. And so it's amazing. And the idea being, that's what this book teaches you, is how to be media literate and how not to just be like, it's trending, so it must be true. Don't be a headline reader, and you just have to learn how to be a person. There's a line from Lee and I, we like rewatch shows we've never, or watch entire runs of things we've never seen before. And I know you and Emma do this too, right, Jack? You guys will. So we did a couple of years ago, we did The West Wing, and I'd never seen The West Wing, and she watched The West Wing. And there's a line in there, Lee's favorite line is Leo McGarity, the chief of staff. He's like, there's a way to be a person. That's his line. And she'll say that. Lee says that all the time. There's a way to be a person, man. And this book teaches you how to be a person. Like, Winston is full of all things. He contains multitudes, as the line says. And I feel we are all Winston. He's the best point of view character for us, because he wants his wife to love him, right? He doesn't like the relationship that he has with his wife. He wants to feel love. He wants women to have whatever they want. He wants humans to be free. So it's just, there's so much to get from him as a point of view character. And it's so, I get verklempt. I love this book so much, and I just think everybody should read it over and over, and revisit it often. You didn't answer the question. How many times have you read it, Ms. Todd?
Only twice.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
This was your second go around?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
No, I've read bits of it. Like, I had spoilers before the first time, and I did not read it as an adolescent. It was a choice I made as an adult. And, there were things that I didn't remember from the first time, like that big chunk. But, when you're discovering it, the first time you're reading, you're going, whoa, this would totally work.
For sure.
As you were talking, Tonya, I was just fact checking myself.
Yeah.
Because someone jumped into bed, and I thought, like, I better fact check that, just to be sure. Tony and I are on WhatsApp. The other communication systems are available.
Yeah.
People, we're not here to promote them, but you can put like a little comic on a little quote about yourself. And I just wanted to check where mine comes from, because it's something that I try and live my life by. And it's, unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. And I was like, when I read that, and I was like, I love that, and I'm going to try and live my life by that rule. And I just thought, I better double check. I know who this is by. I do want to be recorded for posterity for all time for saying the wrong person. I don't know if you guys have heard of this dude. He's called Albert Einstein. It was one of his. So I don't know if you've heard of him.
He has curly hair, right?
Yeah. I feel like he's on South Park, isn't he?
So if Einstein and Orwell are on the same page, then we all should be, I think.
That's amazing.
That's awesome. Is a wonderful place to wrap up. You two are both wonderful. I appreciate your perspectives. I love that you're both teachers and that you put so much thought into your curriculum. For me, this has been a wonderful discussion, and I appreciate you both. Let the amazing listeners know where to find you and how to support your work. Jack.
Oh, well, look for Tony and I'm there. Tony dragged me into this wonderful world of podcasting. So we do a lot together. We work within the Comics in Motion network primarily. We do Season's Greetings, which is watching a whole run of a series and discussing its merits and whether it stands the test of time, which is absolutely fascinating to do. We're about to hit Star Trek. We do Indie Comic Spotlight. I feature on that with Tony. That's his main draw. So I'll let you talk about that more, but I feature on there. And
We've got a big project coming up.
We've got a big project coming up. And then we are also Pop Guerillas, where we review anything from pop culture in less time than it takes to listen to a song. And then, because there's not enough podcasts in the world, I started my own, where I got to indulge myself, because I am a serial kind of list maker and completist. So I am now watching all of Jason Statham's filmography from beginning to end. You two lovely people have already featured. Tonya, I hope at some point I'll get you back on if there's another one down the line you're interested in doing. And that is called Back to Filmography.
It was very fun. Yeah, I'd love to come back.
Great.
Yeah. See the Stath and all of his Stathiness. Don't you need somebody for the sword and sorcery one? I
do have probably what I could have been the best combination for that. No offense, Tonya. I've got Dan and Andy coming on.
Oh, you do? Oh my God.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That will be amazing. Well, I can't wait for that.
Expect some rants is what I would
yes.
say.
Just it'll be like, you'll do the introduction and then just hit mute and walk away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Let
off
the
you
two
go.
of them lose their
Just grab
mind.
the popcorn.
Watch Andy
Absolutely.
lose it. Yeah, he's the best. Yeah, so I do those things. Yes, so Jack and I are doing Indie Comic Spotlight presents Back to the Bibliography, and we are stealing his title, and we're doing the Brubaker Phillips talk about straight white guys. We're going to talk about straight white guys, but we as straight white guys, we're going to focus on these straight white guys evolution as characters, because they have lots of strong female characters and folks of color and all kinds of stuff in their books. So we're going to go through all of the Brubaker Phillips stuff. And remember, for those of you who don't know, Brubaker is the one who broke one of the cardinal rules of comics and was like, oh, you said Bucky's dead forever? False. And he's the one who gave us the Winter Soldier. So so we're doing that. And yeah, I've got some other stuff. Rhea and I keep threatening to do cheer up, but then schedules don't get us there. So yeah, so that's where I am doing those things. And the Pop Guerillas, which obviously is a Comics in Motion thing, but in order to get them all out, it's got a standalone feed too, but then we still show up and take over days on Comics in Motion. So yeah, that's what we do. And you've been obviously on both of our shows, Tonya. So and that's where we are. And I'm at arfarina.com. That's my website. And you can see links to stories I've written, and here's some songs I've written. And if you want to send me a message, you can.
Plug Indie Comic Spotlight.
Indie Comic Spotlight. That was the thing that I started, right? Sorry. So Indie Comic Spotlight. Well, that's Back to the Bibliography is part of Indie Comic Spotlight.
Okay.
Those guys only do. We're not covering.
Talk about what you mainly do for that.
Sure. Indie Comic Spotlight is where we focus on, we do deep dives. So it's not just a rate. We never rate the books, or even if the book sucks or we dislike it. Like when I had Kyle on and we did 30 Days of Night, and he hated 30 Days of Night so very, very much. But we still had a thoughtful conversation about it. And it turned us into eventually watching Interview with the Vampire, because we realized that vampires should be sexy like Brad Pitt. So it turned into that. So Indie Comic Spotlight is where we don't do big two comics, and we take a deep look at the books that are telling important stories. And so Genderqueer, which appears on this series, I found out is one of the most banned books. So I did a ranty, hidden gem, lose my mind, how dare you thing on there. And so you were on and we did Black. And the first time Jack was on, we did Firefly. And it's just like you do books that are big as Firefly or as small as Black. Like everybody's heard of Firefly and hardly anybody's heard of Black, but when Brian Edward Hill's show comes out, everybody will have heard of it. And so it's just cool. It's a cool place where we get to meet. I've met Kelly Sue DeConnick. Kelly Sue DeConnick was on my show. It's still, I can't get over that. I got to meet one of my childhood heroes, Don Chin. You just never know what I get to do on that. So it's very cool. It's all about indie stuff. And Jack is always so nice enough to read along, even when they're not very good. So I appreciate you. Yeah. So
how am I going to grade, Tony, if I don't read along?
Yeah, no, it's that's right. How are you going to grade if you don't?
Right. How can you develop your own opinion if you don't consume the material?
Right. And we
Absolutely.
don't always agree. We've done, when we did Fight Club 2, we were at different places. I brought him in from disliking it as much, and he made me like it a little bit less, but it was a good conversation. So yeah, it's just a place where, because indie comics are where art lives the best. There's very little oversight. Almost everybody is character owned or creator owned, and that's what makes it so beautiful. It's like, this is the story I want to tell. If you don't want me to tell it, that's fine. I can create my own comic company. Indie comics are still the ultimate do it yourself. Allison, who's now essentially part of the network, right? Reburn is amazing.
We're sucking her into making her Comics in Motion adjacent.
But here she is, right? She's just made this thing and nobody could tell her no. Unlimited budget, do whatever you want. Indie comics allows for that. So that's why the show is so important to me. And I'm a big 2 fan, but I indie comics just allow
just know that there's more out there. That's not all that exists.
And it's not all superheroes. I mean, there's going to be no heroes. All my heroes, I believe, have been junkies. Is that correct, Jack?
Correct.
That's going to be the name of one of the books we're going to cover. So, it's not superhero stuff always. It's like real life, gritty, grit in your door, grit in your teeth kind of stuff. So that's my indie comics pitch. Thanks for letting me do that. Thanks for reminding me to do that.
And I didn't realize that Genderqueer was a graphic novel when I chose it for the series.
Oh,
I'm getting ready to read. I was like, oh, wow, this is cool. Well, all right, let me put on a different part of my brain,
yeah,
activate the visuals here. And you know, if you want to know what I thought about that, you'll have to watch that episode.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
until then, we have finished this conversation for 1984. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like, comment, and share. Thank you so much for listening. And more importantly, thank you for reading.